Prime Minister Mark Carney is updating Canadians directly on his plan for the economy. Carney posted a video message this weekend saying he's full steam ahead on pivoting away from the United States.
Many of our former strengths, based on our close ties to America, have become our weaknesses, weaknesses that we must correct. There are some who say there's no need for a comprehensive plan. They believe we should wait it out in the hope that the United States will return to normal, that the good old days will come back. But hope isn't a plan, and nostalgia is not a strategy. We have to take care of ourselves because we can't rely on one foreign partner. We can't control the disruption coming from our neighbors. We can't bet our future on the hope that it will suddenly stop. But we can control what happens here.
Okay, we're going to start there with the power panel. Vanda Nakata was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. And here with me in the studio, we've got Kate Harrison, who's a conservative political analyst, and Rob Russo, who is the Canada correspondent for The Economist. Vanda, I'd like to start with you. I listened to the Prime Minister's address, as some have called it, and I was looking for news. It was a bit of a K-Tel album in terms of things I had heard many times before. Well, what do you make of this particular strategy in terms of putting out a compilation of what has been his core message for the past little while right now in this form?
You know, I was talking to a few friends about it, and I don't think the video is actually meant for people like you and me. But I will say people I know who are interested in politics, but don't stay necessarily on top of the news. Something like my father, my uncle, some coworkers who I think they are more interested in the content because they wouldn't have been so close to it. So while I think for you and for me, it wasn't anything new, it is pretty much what he's been saying for quite some time. So no news from that. But I think for some people, they're looking for a full understanding of what his narrative is, what he's supposed to be. And I think going to his strength, so we all know Mark Carney, his strength is in that 30-second short form clip. He likes to be speaking long form, you know, where you have a breadth of what he's saying. So I think he played to his strength, and that's what the goal of the video was.
Kate, do you think that's what it is, to sort of put out in full form his view of things? Because maybe, you know, shows like this and others, that narrative isn't getting told. How do you view this play?
Yeah, I think that's what the election was for. To your point, I'm not sure what we learned in the video released yesterday that is fundamentally different from how this government is approaching things now and as they were in April. So politics is about timing, and I wonder what the timing of this video is supposed to indicate to people. There hasn't been a marked change or development in the status of negotiations between Canada and the U.S. since the Prime Minister took office. I would say yesterday's video probably leaves Canadians with an understanding that we're not any closer to that than maybe we were in the fall or sometime last spring. So why now? My prediction is twofold. One, the Prime Minister is reminding Canadians, to Vandana's point, everyday Canadians, that Donald Trump is to blame for all of Canada's problems, i.e., even though I have a majority government, I'm really not the problem, guys. Check south of the border. And I wonder what it means for next week's spring economic statement. I do think that we're going to see extraordinary spending. We saw some comments from the IMF suggesting that the debt to GDP ratio can increase based on Canada's fiscal position. I think the government's going to take that ball and run, and they're going to use the uncertainty with the United States as a backdrop for more deficit spending.
Brad, I mean, look, there is a credible argument to say a lot of the problems are Donald Trump's fault. I mean, just look at the inflation numbers today. It's almost entirely driven by oil and to some degree climate change and sort of food-producing sectors. But I don't know precisely what the motivation is, except do they want to start a process of putting out their message in full? I don't know. How do you view what we saw from the Prime Minister and his people?
Yeah, I think it was collecting the message because it's a lot of disparate pieces, so it's all put in one place. I think it's also a brand strengthening exercise. I mean, I was struck by how this reinforces Mark Carney's strength. That is competent management. He's drawing on his experience being a central banker at a time of the 2008 fiscal crisis. So he's drawing on that. The whole premise of this this forward guidance is based on previous crisis and how he's claiming that he was a steady hand at the wheel. So it really leans into his core competency, and we can make inferences there. Obviously, the hit against the Conservatives, which was in that piece that clip that you played there, hope is not a strategy, and you know, that was a clear hit.
Hope is not a
Poilievre.
plan. Nostalgia is not a strategy, I think is what he
That's right.
said.
That was right. Second thing I found great interest is that he was setting expectations, and obviously we've got the spring forecast coming up next week. We've got Kuzma coming up. He was saying the words flatly: things are going to get bad. And so he was setting expectations so that when things do get bad, just like when the central bank kind of gives its forward guidance, they're softening in fourth quarter is expected. Then when it happens, people say, yes, that's right. That was forecast. That was predicted. This is part of the plan. And the third element that I found interesting was his use of history. That is, using the Brock statue, Second World War, St. Lawrence Seaway. He's used those before, but he was putting those in there saying, look, we've been in adversity when the Americans get a little hairy on us before, and we've come out stronger. And I think that was a little, I thought that was an attempt that everything's going to be okay. We'll be fine. And he was able to highlight a couple of the things, because we've been talking about where are the results, and he was attempting to slide those in there. The 13% increase in armed forces enrollment, some of the rents coming down. Certainly not. I'm not advocating that those, therefore, mission accomplished. But nonetheless, he was starting to promote that things in a couple of areas that he's set out to are getting better. So all in all, I think this is a big communications package as opposed to a news-making package.
Rob, how do you see it?
I thought, like Brad, that there were some interesting tells in there, if not news. The clips that he used, clips of Canadian troops and clips of the pandemic, a roiling stock market ticker. Yes, old video of him when he was governor of the Bank of England, I believe, given what he was wearing at the time. So I think he was trying to cast himself as almost a wartime leader. So what war looms in Canada? What is looming? Well, we're going to have a difficult time in the months ahead as we get into Kuzma negotiations. I think that it appears he was trying to lay a foundation for people to say, look, things are going to be difficult, and we should probably prepare for that. Trade talks are already difficult. We have the U.S. ambassador saying nothing's really happening. Howard Lutnick, who is kind of...
Yeah, that was something.
Yeah, who is kind of wildly attacking our strategy. But I also want to get at the notion of provocation. I think there was some provocation. And right now we have a distracted and diminished Donald Trump in front of us, given what's going on in Iran, given what's happening with inflation in the United States. Should that dissipate, should that turn around, this will undoubtedly be seen as a red flag. And you
think the Prime Minister was provoking the President with that video?
When he says our reliance on the United States was an error. Well, I'm not 150 years old, but I know our history. And for 150 years, Canada did pretty well living in this neighborhood. Was the proportion of our trade with the United States too high? Absolutely it was.
Right.
Is it a good idea to increase trade elsewhere? Yes. Does anybody really want to see the amount of trade with the United States go down? I don't think the Prime Minister wants to see that.
No, but wasn't he kind of making the same point he made in the Davos speech, that the integration was seen as a way to get prosperous, but now it's being weaponized against us? That's what I took from it. Do you see it that way?
Perhaps, but using the language that he did, I think will probably be reported back to Washington as a provocation, and I don't think that bothers him at all. I think he knew his Davos speech was going to be a provocation, and he's fine with it. Is that a good strategy right now? While the president is distracted, and if he's going to be diminished, maybe. But he's taking a risk.
Vanda, did you see it that way? Is this potentially or deliberately provocative by Mark Carney to define things in these terms?
I think he's trying to show strength of Canada and show that we don't have a fear to move away from the United States should we have to. And I think he feels that a position of strength and that confidence works well with Donald Trump, better than a position of weakness saying, well, we're integrated, we're friends, let's make it work. I think he's saying that, while we have had this long time relationship, any partner that in one sweep can change everything that's not a good economic strategy. And I'm okay to take measures to move away from that. And I think Canadians overall feel comfortable with, while we'll always have some interdependency with the United States, we need to look for other options. I mean, it's long been talked about before even this took place about our lack of productivity, that we are too dependent on the United States. And even when the tariffs first came up, people were worried. They were scared we wouldn't be able to withstand all this. So I think he's trying to show that confidence. And there has been people who've liked almost, Doug Ford's way of pushing forward, saying, we're not scared, we're going to take measures against you. And I think he's born for that, but in his way.
Right.
So I don't think it was necessarily a provocation, but I think he's very comfortable with taking a position of confidence that we will find other partners and ways to move forward as a country. So Donald Trump gets that message as well.
Right, like Kate, I mean, maybe it does provoke, and I'm not saying it won't, because who knows with Donald Trump, but it felt a little bit like the message the Prime Minister had in that Davos speech about the Havel and the shopkeeper taking the sign out of the window.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
He signaled then that they're going to say the things that get it off their chest, because look, Donald Trump keeps making choices and the world keeps paying the price. And this is kind of what he's laying out there, right? But is that deliberately or potentially provocative in your view?
Well, what I would observe based on the Davos speech is that it didn't result in an overwhelming majority of middle powers coming to the table and saying, yeah, Canada's right. What other world leaders are doing are actually saying, okay, that's all well and good, Canada, but we have our own agreements and our deals to strike with the United States. I think that there has been an evolution.
Kate. I mean, all of these term sheets that like Keir Starmer and everyone signed were ruled null and void by the Supreme Court.
You could say the exact same thing about the LOIs and the MOUs associated with
but the
Carney's
European
trade
Union
deals.
Spain wouldn't let them use their bases. The Brits put limits on things. I mean, they stood up to the U.S. in a way we have not seen the European nations push back against them in a long time, and the voters of Hungary got rid of their biggest ally.
And the nature of Canada's trade relationship with the United States is fundamentally different than all of those other countries.
1,000%, yes.
So therefore, it may warrant a different approach. There has been a clear demarcation in the Prime Minister's position on what deal is best for Canada, and I agree with Rob that it can be seen as a provocation. We went from, we will strike a new economic and security partnership with the United States last April, to, hey, actually, the current CUSMA arrangement is pretty good. Okay, this is the best deal that Canada can get. To now the Prime Minister calling it a weakness. What is the position of Canada right now? I do think that this is designed to get some kind of a reaction or condition for bad times ahead. And again, I think that the spring economic statement is going to be indicative of that. And again, at some point, Canadians are going to say, sir, you've had a year telling us that that there's troubles ahead in rocky waters. What are you actually doing to fix those problems?
Okay, Brad, I want to bring you in, but first I want to play a clip because I don't know if it provoked Donald Trump, but it has provoked the Conservatives to hit back with their video. We've got the War of the Videos going on. Pierre Poilievre put his own video out today to counter the Prime Minister's message. Just have a listen to this.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister released yet another video that repeated the same speech that he's been giving for the last year about the U.S. He recycled the same promises and reused the same old lines, this time with a little more dramatic flair. Now, it's not surprising that the Prime Minister wants to distract from his costly failures by pushing fear and re-upping his rhetoric yesterday. We do not need more costly illusions from Mr. Carney. We need real-world results at your grocery store, your gas pump, and in your bank account.
Okay, Brad, let me first say I hope we're not in an era of pop-up video in our Canadian politics, but I fear we may be. Just what do you make of where these things are now that old promises, familiar criticisms, and a potentially provocation towards the president? Hold on a second, Brad. Your audio has gone haywire. Is anyone else hearing that, or is that just my earpiece?
I heard that too.
Okay, okay. We got a problem with Brad's audio, so while we try to figure that out, I'm going to throw the life raft at Rob Russo, see what he thinks about what Pierre Poilievre had to say. And we'll come back to Brad in just a second.
I think that we have a clear demarcation now about the most important issue facing us over the next few months before we get to an Alberta referendum, which I think is an even bigger issue that Donald Trump might play a role in. And we now have a real debate, and I think it's an important debate, and I think it's exactly what our Westminster system is about. We have a Prime Minister who says there is a rupture, and there's no going back. We have a leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition saying, yeah, there is a problem, but we can't ignore the gravitational pull of the United States. We don't know if the president does turn out to be diminished by Iran, if he is pulverized, his party's pulverized in the midterm elections, what we have is the Prime Minister's strategy of ragging the puck until we get to the midterms. I think that's what's happening. That's going to look brilliant. But we won't know until then. We won't know whether or not this is going to work until then. It worked in 2018. It appears to be working right now because of what's going on in the Middle East. But I think it's an interesting debate, and we're being well served by our parliamentary system right now.
Well, our video systems are doing a great job. It'd be good to see it happening in Parliament. I think the pit crew is still working on Brad, but Vandana, your thoughts on what Pierre Poilievre had to say in terms of his rebuttal to the Prime Minister's message?
I think that's the appropriate place for him to be as an opposition leader. And in fact, I think when he was almost trying to compete with the Prime Minister, like taking international trips, going down south, working with him, I think he did lose some of the good things that he was good at in terms of capturing the narrative of what Canadians are thinking about. So talking about bringing it back to affordability, his lines on the grocery store, bank account, that will interest people, So I think what he did is took back what he is good at. And I think that is an appropriate place for him to be as the opposition leader, and actually quite effective.
Okay, Kate, while we've continued in our efforts to silence the NDP, I'm going to bring you back. Just what are your thoughts
Justice for Brad.
What are your thoughts on what Pierre Poilievre did here in terms of, they put out a Melissa Lantsman video yesterday and then he came out with one today. So
yeah, well,
it's
if
a 2 for 1,
you're going
right?
to come at the king of unprompted videos and long form videos, you don't want to miss. And I think there is something to be said about, the format of delivery of the Prime Minister's video coming that way instead of a press conference and instead of making himself available to the media to answer questions on this. And I would observe that it's mainly been a broadcast message on things related to CUSMA from the PM as opposed to an exchange with the media. I think it's interesting contrast and helpful contrast for the Conservatives to have, the Prime Minister's repeated rhetoric of the last year, to paraphrase Poilievre's comments, compared to today's inflation numbers, for example. The statistics don't lie, and the stats are bad. They're very bad, in particular around food inflation. That if that problem is going to get worse, then the Prime Minister needs to talk about his plan to correct some of those challenges in the short term, but also make the link in terms of how advancing trade conversations is essential to course correcting on that, because of course there is so much trade at the heart, with the U.S. at the heart of food and agriculture.
Right, but just as a final point on this, and we've lost Brad entirely, so my apologies, everybody. We're trying to get him back. But Rob, is there that much of a gap in what they're saying about the United States, right? In that I don't believe anyone in the Liberal government said we just need to cut off the United States and completely move away from them. But it can't be the only thing we do, right? Because all of our efforts have broadly, not all of our efforts, but corporate Canada to north-south, dollars the same, language the same, laws are similar. It's just been easy, right? Then go into Asia and go into Europe. I don't think they're saying we must completely cut the United States out of our economic plan, but we can't be solely reliant on it the way that we have, given what has been revealed about the country under President Trump's second term.
Yes, but at the risk of engaging in child psychology, I don't think that Donald Trump is going to interpret the Prime Minister of Canada saying that our reliance on the United States
Understood, but I mean the difference between what Poilievre
error.
and Carney are saying.
So then the question to me becomes, did he do it on purpose? Did the Prime Minister do this by design? And that's an interesting question to ask. And if so, why did he do it? Why this video now? I think is an interesting question. And I think it's because, as others have said, it's an acknowledgement that times could get grim, if they aren't already grim. For many people, they are grim. My mom goes into the grocery store. I hear from her all the time. She's trying to get me to directly appeal to the Prime Minister to tell him to do something about the price of broccoli.
Okay.
And cabbage.
Just broccoli, or
yeah. So that kind of grim time economically, that more than a pinch that we're feeling, there's a sense that we just can't get ahead, is real. And I think this is the Prime Minister's attempt, perhaps, to let us know that we are in a not a time of war, but a time of crisis.
But Kate, just on the positions of the two leaders, like I don't think Mark Carney is saying let's completely give up on the United States. He's saying let's look at other options. Just like I'm not saying, I don't think Pierre Poilievre is saying let's never look at other options. Let's only look at the United States, right? The criticism in the Prime Minister's video is that people say there's no need for a comprehensive plan. I don't know if that's a fair, I don't think that's a fair characterization of the Conservative position. So it's like they're trying to hit each other with something where there is not a massive gap in terms of their prescription for the broad direction of things.
It's about how much reality wants to be acknowledged in the near term. I don't think there's any observer of politics, right-wing, left-wing, conservative, liberal, New Democrat, that would say we need to do more to diversify our trade relationships. What the Conservatives are saying is, yes, but the relationship with the United States is so fundamental to the current economic setup of Canada. And if we are going to look outside of the United States, we need to look at who it is that we're doing business with. We talk about Donald Trump and the United States as an unreliable trade partner. China has interfered in Canadian elections.
Sure.
The Indian government is accused of being involved in the extrajudicial murder of a citizen on Canadian soil. Yet these are countries that the Prime Minister is happy to pursue renewed agreements and negotiations with. So Conservatives are saying we need to look at this realistically. And it doesn't mean that we can't diversify, but there are facts at play.
Well, in fairness, I think the Prime Minister is saying much the same thing, too. We take the world as it is, not as we wish it to be, right? But some arguments are never going to fly with the other side, and some things are never going to fly.